Site for Wight Employment Tribunal Report by Miriam Tong, CEO. Read by Chris Kane, Marketing, Communications and Fundraising Manager. As reported at the March 2018 AGM, the trustees agreed to review in May their previous decision regarding the historic accidental overpayment of a former employee. At the May 2018 meeting of trustees, the decision was made that further legal advice was required, and this was sought. Whilst a full report and advice is currently awaited from the local solicitors approached, preliminary advice was that it might be possible to make a claim for some of the accidental overpayment. However, because of an employment tribunal claim being pursued by the former employee for constructive dismissal, unpaid wages, and for accrued but untaken holiday, the legal advice of our HR advisors was that the Society should not actively pursue such action whilst the employment tribunal claim was ongoing. Prior to the commencement of the employment tribunal process, the claimant had sought redress through ACAS, seeking a payment of £3,800 to settle her claims. The Society declined entering into such a settlement as it did not support the claims made. The employment tribunal hearing took place in Southampton on the 11th and 12th of June 2018, and the judgment of the employment tribunal judge was received by the Society on the 13th of July 2018. All of the claimant's spurious claims have been dismissed, and the Society has been completely vindicated. Details of the employment tribunal can now be shared, as all employment tribunal judgments are published online in the public domain. www.gov.uk/employment-tribunal-decisions. Preparation for the employment tribunal created a significant workload, and the trustees, myself and the staff team are delighted that all claims made were dismissed, meaning that time, effort and energy can once again be entirely devoted to taking the charity forward for the benefit of islanders affected by sight loss. As the employment tribunal process has now been concluded, during the forthcoming August 2018 meeting, the trustees will review their initial decision not to seek repayment of the salary overpayment. By this time, the full report and legal advice regarding the possibility of seeking repayment is expected. Following the August meeting of trustees, it is hoped that a decision can be reached in the best interest of the charity that will draw a line under the regrettable matter of the salary overpayment. Miriam Tong, CEO.
Good morning everyone, this is Mike.
And this is Sue.
And we're starting off the day's proceedings with the Society news for Friday the 20th of July 2018. On Tuesday, Laura will be attending the Our Place drop-in session, which is held at the West Wight Sports and Community Centre in Mower Place in Freshwater between 10 a.m. and 12 noon on Tuesday the 24th of July. She will have information about the Society, the clubs and activities available, as well as demonstrations of some low vision aids available. Come along and say hello and enjoy a free tea or coffee. The swimming group are meeting this Tuesday the 24th of July in Ryde at the waterside pool. The pool is closed to the public whilst the group swims. There are male and female volunteers to help you get in and out of the pool, as well as lifeguards to ensure your safety. To join the swimming group, please call the Society first to notify us of your swimming ability.
Wednesday. The weekly coffee morning will be held at Millbrook House this Wednesday the 25th of July from 10:30 a.m. The coffee mornings are not just for blind and partially sighted people. Anybody can come along and have a cup of coffee or tea, as well as a piece of cake. Alongside the coffee morning, we'll also be holding the low vision drop-in between 10 a.m. and 12 noon on Wednesday the 25th of July. This is a weekly event that allows you to view and try the low vision equipment we have at the Society without the need for an appointment. This will be the last coffee morning and low vision drop-in until September, as the activities at Millbrook House take a break during August. Information regarding the My Guide service, which we are providing in conjunction with the Guide Dogs Association, will be available at an information morning on Wednesday the 25th of July at Millbrook House. If you have a friend, relative, neighbour or contact who may be interested in volunteering as a sighted guide with the My Guide service, then please ask them to come along between 10 and 12 to find out more information.
On Thursday, the Thursday social group are meeting on Thursday the 26th of July at Millbrook House. The group meets from 10:30 a.m. until 2 p.m. You can knit or just have a chat. Then later in the afternoon, volunteers come in and read to the group from different topics. This will be the last meeting until September, as the club takes a break during August.
Friday. The Striders group will be meeting on Friday the 27th of July for a 5-mile walk in Sway on the mainland. The minibus will be leaving Millbrook House promptly at 9:20 a.m. to enable it to make the time booked for the ferry crossing. Anyone wishing to attend must contact the Society in advance to register their interest and walking ability. Costs for the day trip are £11.20 for the ferry, approximately £3 to £5 for the train, depending on the rail card, and the usual £5 club fees.
Any other news? A bucket collection is being held in aid of Sight for Wight at Freshwater Co-op on Saturday the 28th of July between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. To support our recruitment drive for volunteers, we will be advertising our vacancies on a regular basis in the hope that you may have a friend, relative, neighbour or contact who could be interested in volunteering with the Society. We have approximately 85 active volunteers who support the Society in many ways to provide the services we offer to our members. Our volunteer team are committed to their volunteer roles and have fun and social interaction along the way, which is of mutual benefit to everyone involved. Current vacancies are minibus drivers, dress for less retail support, escorts on our minibus, events ambassadors to support at island-wide events, fundraising by way of bucket collections at island supermarkets, sighted guides for our monthly and varied island walks, My Guide sighted guide escorts. Please contact Michelle Taylor, volunteer manager, on telephone number 5222005 or email volunteers@iwsb.org.uk for further details. The Wednesday group will be having their annual summer outing to Haven Street Railway on Wednesday the 1st of August, followed by a pub lunch. The Thursday social club outing is on Wednesday the 22nd of August for a return boat trip from Cowes along the River Medina, stopping for lunch at the Folly Inn. If you would like to join them or would like more information on either trip, then please call Laura on 5222005 or email members@iwsb.org.uk. Do you enjoy the activities and facilities provided by Sight for Wight? Perhaps you've recently attended an activity or event and would like to wax lyrical about it. If so, then Chris Kane would like to hear from you. As part of our promoting well-being and supporting services and activities, we would like to hear your positive feedback, which will be part of a video promoting Sight for Wight. If you have a story you would like to enthuse about and don't mind being recorded on video, then please contact Chris Kane on 5222005 or email admin@iwsb.org.uk.
Scaffolding news. Please find below a list of known footway obstructions for works including scaffolding or hoarding. We are unable to include end dates as many are extended on a week-by-week basis. Also included are tables and chairs permits that have been issued in the past week. Bay and Ventnor area. There is currently scaffolding at Premier Inn 1-9 Esplanade, Sandown, 11A and 11B St John's Road, Sandown, the Toymaster 103 High Street, Sandown, the scaffolds up in Albion Road, United Reformed Church High Street, Shanklin, Bar 64 High Street, Shanklin, corner of Trinity Road and Madeira Road, Ventnor, 1 Boniface Road and into Trinity Road, Ventnor, Hose Roads Dixon, 1 High Street, Ventnor, 2 Eleanor House, Grove Road, Ventnor, and there are hoardings at Premier Inn, 1-9 Esplanade, Sandown, United Reformed Church, High Street, Shanklin. New scaffolding is due at Railway Bridge, Avenue Road, Sandown from the 10th of September, and new skips are due at 27 Clarendon Road, Shanklin, from the 30th of July, and 11A Steep Hill Court Road, Ventnor, from the 30th of July.
In the Cows area, there is currently scaffolding at 91 High Street, Cows, 93 High Street, Cows, behind the hoarding, 78 Park Road, Cows, Exmouth House, Bath Road, Cows, Carville Court, Terminus Road, Cows, also in Carville Lane. There are currently hoardings at 93 High Street, Cows.
Newport area. There's currently scaffolding at 18 Lugley Street, Newport, 46 to 48 Lugley Street, Newport, Braunston House, Lugley Street, Newport, Dominoes, St James Street, Newport, Unit 2, 32 to 39 High Street, Newport, Hurst & Son, Lugley Street, Newport. Scaffolding is up in Lugley Street and Holyrood Street. Aged UK, 145 High Street, Newport, 114 Pyle Street, Newport.
And in the Ryde area, there is currently scaffolding at 4 St Michael's Avenue, Ryde, Boots, 170 High Street, Ryde, McColl's, 4748 Union Street, Ryde, Hills Court, High Street and Newport Street, Ryde, West End, 34 John Street, Ryde, which oversailing into Newport Street, and 12 the Vicarage at Seaview. There are currently skips at 39 Harding Road, Ryde, 31 Osborne Road, Ryde, and Sand Cove, Pier Road, Seaview.
And the West Wight area, there's currently scaffolding at Jojo's, School Green Road, Freshwater.
This week's In Touch is In Touch in this week's episode. Manchester Airport, if you're preparing for a holiday, you may be about to negotiate an airport, and for blind and visually impaired people, that can mean relying on assistance to leave the plane. The Civil Aviation Authority has published its latest review of airports and their treatment of disability. We talk about Manchester Airport's second poor rating and the failure of Gatwick, Stansted and Birmingham to properly collect data. And naturally, we talk about a lack of vision, but can you have too much? We talk to Cressida Ryan about her diagnosis of cerebral polyopia and how it affects her work as a reader of ancient Greek. It's presented by Peter Wight and produced by Kevin Core.
The Isle of Wight County Press for Friday the 20th of July 2018. The lead article today: Woman stole Katie's cash. Scammer targeted sick child's bed fund. A con woman stole money from a sick little girl after claiming she ran a charity. In 2013, when Katie was 3, the family of Katie Baxter, who has infantile Parkinson's, epilepsy, brain damage, deafness and autism, were raising money for a specially adapted £6,000 bed for Katie. Tracy Smith, 50, got in touch via Facebook telling the family she ran a charity. Isle of Wight Carousel. and she could help. Prosecutor Anthony Bailey told the Isle of Wight Crown Court during Smith's sentencing last Friday. Smith, who now lives in Cambridge, after leaving the island with the family's money, pleaded guilty to fraud by false representation. Thousands of pounds were raised through the charity, but the family never saw a penny. When the police told me she had stolen the money, I fell on the floor with the phone to my ear and cried, Katie's mother, Sue Baxter, said. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe that anyone could do that to a poorly little girl. At the time, Mrs. Baxter had no reason not to believe the so-called fundraiser. Smith even told Mrs. Baxter she had a son with similar medical needs, and the pair became close. We spoke on the phone all the time. When I was blubbing away, she was the one on the other end of the line. I trusted her, Mrs. Baxter said. However, when plans were made to meet up, Smith would cancel at the last minute, saying her son was unwell. Money was channelled into Smith's account, and the first charity auction raised thousands of pounds. People helping with the auction questioned Smith about the funds. However, Smith became angry and secretive and alienated other fundraisers, Mrs. Baxter said. Many months passed, and Mrs. Baxter still had not received a penny. She asked to have the money, and Smith told her it was in a 60-day ISA and she would have to wait. Eventually, Mrs. Baxter got suspicious and contacted the police, who raided Smith's home. After this, the Baxter family started receiving shocking abuse from friends and relatives of Smith, who posted on Facebook immediately after the police raid, saying she was innocent and claiming she had tried to help the family. The Baxters had to move from Sandown to Freshwater, as other people thought they had pocketed the money. One person threatened to burn their house down, another slashed the tyres of Katie's father, Dan Baxter's motorcycle, another threw a rock through their window at home, and people spat at them in the street. I really wanted to say something and tell people she was lying, but I couldn't because of the police investigation, Mrs. Baxter said. The court heard Smith's bank records were taken by police, but most of the money could not be identified as being for the charity, and so Smith was only charged with taking £1,000, but the real sum was thought to be many times more. Smith moved to Cambridgeshire, but police tracked her down. Representing Smith, Harriet Gilchrist said her client was disgusted with her behaviour and admitted to taking some money to help her own difficult financial situation. Smith, of Badgerny Road, March, Cambridgeshire, was sentenced to 12 months in prison, suspended for 18 months, and was ordered to pay £1,000 compensation and carry out 180 hours of unpaid work. Mrs. Baxter told the county press she wants to take Smith to a small claims court and get back all the money that was donated through her, so that she can return it to the kind people who donated. Mrs. Baxter said, I genuinely feel awful for the people who donated and spent their money on helping us. I will do my best to get the money back.
Charity scheme to help visually impaired on the island. A new and potentially life-changing scheme has been launched to help blind and visually impaired people. The Sight for Wight and Guide Dogs charities have joined forces to launch My Guide, which matches people living with sight loss with a support volunteer to help them live more independently. They will meet each week to work on achieving life goals and building confidence. Sight for Wight Chief Executive Miriam Tong said, as the island's long-established independent sightless charity, we are delighted to be working with National Charity Guide Dogs to deliver its My Guide programme locally to support islanders affected by sight loss. The charity is recruiting My Guide volunteers. Anyone interested can drop into the charity's headquarters at Millbrook House, Carisbrook Road, Newport, between 10 a.m. and noon on Wednesday, or telephone 522205.
Newport entered for Best Town title. Newport has been nominated for the High Street of the Year award. The island's county town has been entered in the government's Great British High Street Awards, a chance to win up to £10,000 for improvements to its shopping areas, transport and public spaces. The award covers the whole town centre, not just the High Street. This means popular areas such as Watch Bell Lane, Node Hill and St Thomas's Square are included. Previous winners include the Cathedral Quarter of Derby, Falmouth and the Norwich Lanes. The nomination follows the Shaping Newport consultation last winter, delivered as part of the Shaping Newport partnership set up by Newport Parish Council, Newport Business Association and the Isle of Wight Council. Councillor Wayne Whittle, Cabinet Member for Business Development, Regeneration and Tourism, said, "After the great work on the Shaping Newport Place plan, we're joining MP Bob Seeley to put Newport forward as a great British high street, worthy of a government support." Mr Seeley added, "On the island, we're lucky to have many vibrant high streets full of independent shops, and we want that to continue because it's a part of our island's unique character." On the ground, support and events will be up for grabs for the winners, and there's an opportunity to join in a competition to encourage island shoppers to use high street businesses. Julie Jones-Evans is a champion of Newport and Vice Chair of Newport Business Association and Newport Parish Council. She was also a key person in Shaping Newport and has a shop in Node Hill. Councillor Jones-Evans said, "We have a fantastic evidence-based plan now, identifying areas to improve upon and a plan of action to deliver, if we win and get the money. Town centres are now all about having experiences and being somewhere pleasant, making them places people want to go because they have a nice environment and interesting things happen. Winning this prize would be a shot in the arm for us to deliver this quicker, to make Newport more of a go-to place and make people fall in love with our county town."
Luke shapes up for run. After he was born blind and with chronic renal failure, Luke Corbett spent much of his childhood on dialysis before undergoing a life-saving kidney transplant at 9 years old. Now he wants to thank the Children's Hospice that looked after him every weekend by running a half marathon, raising as much money as possible to help families in a similar situation. For Luke, aged 30, who works at the Island Roads call centre, tackling the Birmingham half marathon will also be a big personal challenge. He remains on daily medication and is partially sighted. He is blind in his right eye and has tunnel vision in his left, and although he has lost a stone since April, he said he needed to lose more weight before the event in October. "I've recently gone through a marriage breakup, so decided to get some goals to rebuild my self-esteem. I am not the skinniest of individuals, so there's a lot of training and hard work ahead, but I know with the right mindset I will complete the challenge for such a good cause," said Luke of Carisbrook Road at Newport. Luke has embarked on a running regime to get into shape with new trainers donated by Love Running Newport, and said he was determined to succeed. "I've joined a gym and started a training program," he said. "I have been through some dark times recently, and this is something I really wanted to do." Luke hopes to raise £1,000 for Acorns Children's Hospice in Birmingham. You can support Luke at www.justgiving.com/fundraising/Luke Corbett.
Queer question time. Cuts to LGBT+ youth groups, hate crime and sex education were discussed by a panel of politicians this week. Isle of Wight Pride organisers brought Queer Question Time to the Apollo Theatre on Monday, giving islanders a chance to quiz Isle of Wight Council Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Councillor Claire Mosdell, Conservative, Councillors Julia Baker-Smith, Labour, and Andrew Garrett, Lib Dem, and Isle of Wight Youth Councillor Charlie Button, Green. Councillor Mosdell was criticised for claiming failing mental health services were down to a lack of understanding and recruitment difficulties rather than cuts, but applauded for agreeing to reconsider cutting breakout youth funding. Panellists discussed the creation of LGBT+ care homes for elderly islanders, how to reach out to black and ethnic minority communities, given the lack of diversity at last year's Isle of Wight Pride, and the importance of reporting hate crime. Panellists agreed Isle of Wight Pride was hugely important, They said it had changed attitudes, brought the community together, celebrated love, and created a space where people felt free to be themselves.
A deer that reportedly swam from the Isle of Wight to Southsea drowned after a passing boat tried to help a rescue operation by lassoing the animal. Authorities reminded the public to call 999 if they see an animal in distress, rather than try to rescue it themselves. The deer was spotted on the island by ride man Peter West at Puckball Park while he was walking his dogs at 6 a.m. It was on the tarmac walkway, and when it saw me and the dogs, it leapt over the railings and ran towards the sea. It kept going until I couldn't see it anymore. I phoned the police, but they weren't very interested. I was worried because it was such a long way. I know deer are good swimmers, but with all the big ships and the wash, I was worried about it. I saw the pictures on the news online, and it is definitely the same one. The alarm was raised on the mainland when the Queen's Harbour Master, Portsmouth, alerted UK Coast Guards at 8:45 a.m. when CCTV picked up the deer in the water near Blue Reef Aquarium at Southsea. Portsmouth Coast Guard rescue team went to the scene at Southsea, where the Roebuck deer had come on land, but the animal retreated back into the sea. It then started swimming back towards the island. Hampshire Fire and Rescue, who was called out alongside the Coast Guard and Portsmouth RNLI, said rescuers were in a race against time to save the animal. A crowd was forming on the shoreline as the operation took place, and the Coast Guard rescue team moved people back. A spokesperson for Hampshire Fire and Rescue said, "One of our animal rescue advisors was picked up from the beach by the RNLI and taken to where the deer was 200 metres off the shore. A passing boat tried to aid the rescue and lassoed the deer, unfortunately drowning the 3-year-old Roebuck. The RNLI and animal rescue advisors managed to get the deer aboard and gave CPR with no result. He advised people call 999 if they saw an animal in distress."
At Pride, we can be ourselves. Stevie, 17, tells his story. With UK Pride taking place tomorrow, Saturday, in Ryde, a transgender teenager has told the county press why the event is so important. Stevie McLean, 17, who will start transitioning from female to male next year, took part in last year's inaugural parade. "It was amazing. I think it was really good for the island. A lot of people might not realise we're here, but after Pride it was like, we're here and we're here to stay," said Stevie. "Pride was really important to me personally. Sometimes you feel like no one gets it, but at Pride I knew it wasn't just me, it's somewhere we can all be ourselves." Stevie, who studies animal care at the Isle of Wight College, came out as trans when he was 13. "I always thought I was a tomboy. I didn't know any better, but then puberty hit and I knew something was seriously wrong," he said. "I went online and found this phrase transgender and started watching a trans blogger, The Real Alex Bertie, on YouTube. Everything he said was exactly how I felt." Stevie's parents, Sean and Lisa Ann, both 47, supported Stevie every step of the way, although they were shocked at first. Isle of Wight Pride Deputy Parade Director Lisa Ann, who sells handmade Proud keyrings and donates the proceeds to Pride and other LGBT plus charities, said, "We're Christian, we go to church every Sunday, and we wondered if it would conflict with our beliefs. But everyone at church, even though they are an older generation, were very accepting." Sean said, "God says, love one another, and we love Stevie for who he is." It has not been an easy journey for Stevie. He was bullied at school, where he had to use the girls' changing room and was repeatedly referred to as female by one of the teachers. He would self-harm, he said, to get the boy out. After one student screamed "trans faggot" across the playground, Sean and Lisa Ann took Stevie out of school. He was homeschooled for a year before college, where everyone has been supportive. "Most of my friends now who have always known me as male, are actually transgender. There are plenty of us on the island, said Stevie of Sandown. We're all human. It's just some of us have to work a bit harder to be ourselves.
GP crisis as practice closes to new patients. Fears have been raised the island's GP recruitment crisis is spiralling out of control following the news one practice has stopped taking new patients. Sandown Medical Centre has closed its list to new patients except where they are immediate family members of existing patients due to a shortage of doctors. It hopes to reopen the list this autumn after taking on a newly qualified GP, but practice manager Karen Hermans said it had been a struggle. Over the past 3 years, one GP has retired and 2 have moved to New Zealand, leaving the medical centre unable to cope with growing demand. Although a new pharmacist and advanced nurse practitioner have been recruited, Ms. Hermans said there were some services only a doctor could provide. This was a last resort and it was not done lightly. We have to protect the GPs we do have, or they would want to leave too, she said. The medical centre had applied to the Isle of Wight Clinical Commissioning Group, that's CCG, to close its list for 12 months, but only a 6-month closure was approved. Members of the Isle of Wight Council's Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Adult Social Care and Health this week raised concerns about the impact of the closure on residents and the Shanklin and braiding practices that had shared the workload. Councillor Carl Love, who said other island practices were facing similar pressures and were also on the verge of closing, said, "The situation is spiralling out of control." Members felt so strongly they took a vote of no confidence in the CCG, which was supported unanimously. The CCG said it worked with Sandown Medical Centre to explore all options before approving the closure, but the committee questioned whether the practice could cut back on additional services such as cervical screening, contraceptive services and vaccinations to focus on what is described as core GP work. In a letter to the committee, the CCG said NHS England and the CCG are aware of the island's specific issues around recruitment and retention, and as a priority continue to work on ways to increase stability in the primary care system.
Isle of Wight firm to tackle floaty problems. Isle of Wight company, Wight Shipyard, has been drafted in to fix the Cowes floating bridge. The Isle of Wight Council said the improvement works would enable the chain ferry to operate at all tide times. Currently, the floating bridge cannot run at certain times due to problems with the chain depth during a fast-flowing spring ebb tide. Wight Shipyard of East Cowes is drafting plans for hydraulics to tighten and slacken the bridge's chains, giving yachts proper clearance at all times of the tides. In addition, it will draw up proposals for new prow finger extensions to allow better access for vehicles and reduce noise when the floating bridge docks. The cost of the improvement work is currently unknown and will only be clear once the council has agreed at a design solution. Income for the floating bridge since it entered service in May last year has been £578,000. Between April and June this year, the income was £193,000. Council leader, Councillor Dave Stewart, said, "The council is very pleased to be working in partnership with a prominent local company to design improvements that will help provide what we need for the floating bridge to work at all times of the tide." Between April and June, 120,000 foot passengers and 48,000 vehicles used the service, very much showing it's reliable and earning money for islanders. However, we want it to be 100%. Finding a solution to the chain depth issue is complex because of the nature of the Medina, but initial designs and discussion between Mainstay, the builder of the floating bridge, Wight Shipyard, Cowes Harbour Commission and the council are certainly encouraging, and we're all committed to working together. Peter Morton, Wight Shipyard Chief Executive, said, "We want to move forward and resolve the issues and believe we can. The chain ferry is vital to East Cowes, West Cowes, and indeed the whole island, so we look forward to working together to find a workable solution while keeping the ferry operating. Mainstay Managing Director Stuart Graves said, "We are pleased Wight Shipyard will be working on design improvements to the drive chain tension, and we look forward to working with them to negate this operational issue."
A group of 6 men assaulted a lone woman in Newport, prompting the police to appeal for information. The 34-year-old woman was driving her car along Trafalgar Road at around 6:45 p.m. last Tuesday. As she approached the junction with Nelson Road, the men walked in front of her vehicle, causing her to stop. One of the group then smashed the passenger side window before they walked away. The woman sustained small cuts to her face as a result of the broken glass. The men are all described as being white and aged between 20 and 30. One was described as having blonde hair and a pink complexion. Another was described as being of medium build with a tattoo on his left shoulder, short cropped hair and wearing dark trousers and white trainers. A third man was described as being of large build with short cropped hair. Isle of Wight police have appealed for witnesses. Anyone with information can call 101, quoting reference 4418025980.
Latest Redjet to be named by Camilla. Redjet 7, Redfunnel's new high-speed passenger ferry, which has been built in East Cowes, will be named by Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, in Cowes on Tuesday. The ship will be named at a special ceremony with festivities starting at noon and the naming itself at 1:30 p.m. at Trinity Landing, followed by lunch at the Royal Yacht Squadron for VIP guests. The public can watch from Cowes Parade, and tickets are also available to book a short excursion aboard Redjet 7 from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m, with all the proceeds going to Redfunnel's 2018 Charity of the Year, the Isle of Wight Donkey Sanctuary.
More sharks are to be seen around the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight has been named 4th in Britain's top 10 shark spotting locations. Scientific research carried out by the National Geographic listed the top shark spots in the country, placing the island at number 4 behind Cornwall, the Scilly Isles and Devon. The research also revealed new species of sharks that may be heading to UK waters in the next 30 years because of climate change, including hammerhead, black tip and sand tiger sharks. The research by Dr. Ken Collins, former administrator of the UK Shark Tagging Programme and Senior Research Fellow at the University of Southampton, was commissioned by Nat Geo Wild TV channel to celebrate Sharkfest, a week of shark programmes on this week. It predicts we could see non-indigenous species of sharks from the Mediterranean making their way to the British coastline by 2050. The new shark map of Britain, released this week, estimates that there may be more than 10 million small sharks and 100,000 larger sharks in British waters, as well as some 40 different species, including thresher, basking and nursehound sharks. Dr. Collins, based at the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton, said, "It's likely we will be seeing more sharks spread from former regions, such as the Mediterranean Sea, towards our waters in the UK over the next 30 years. These include the likes of black tips, sand tigers and hammerheads, which are currently found swimming off the coast of Spain and Portugal. Species indigenous to our waters, such as the basking thresher and nursehound, are declining in numbers due to overfishing and other pressures, so need to be protected," said Dr. Collins. He added, "There is considerable debate as to whether we have great white sharks in UK waters. I see no reason why not. They live in colder waters off South Africa and have a favourite food source of seals along the Cornish coast. The only argument against against there being great white sharks in our waters is numbers worldwide are declining, so the chances of seeing one around the UK fall year by year. While the potential number of shark species around the UK may increase in the next few decades, the overall number of sharks, especially the larger ones, will fall as a result of overfishing, plastic waste and climate change.
Police called to village meeting. The chairman of Bembridge Parish Council has denied the village is ungovernable after its latest meeting was abandoned and the police called. Trouble flared at the packed meeting on Tuesday when former parish councillor Alexander Hopkinson-Woolley tried to raise concerns over the ongoing row in the village over the sale of 5 to 7 High Street. However, Chairman Councillor Keith Fagan ruled his statement was not allowed according to council rules. When Mr Hopkinson-Woolley refused to leave the meeting, Councillor Fagan abandoned the meeting and called the police. However, they did not arrive. Speaking after the meeting, Mr Hopkinson-Woolley, who resigned from the council earlier this year after he was sent a white feather in the post, said he had tried to raise the financial irresponsibility of the council. He said, "I was the only person, in fact, to speak because the meeting was closed down after I had spoken. They did say they were calling the police, but the police never came." Councillor Fagan told the county press the meeting had been halted and police called because Mr Hopkinson-Woolley refused to obey council rules about speaking in the meeting. He said, "There was a bit of disruption and he refused to leave the hall when he was requested to do so. We called the police, but they failed to arrive. I was forced to abandon the meeting. I had no choice but to ask him to leave. He was refusing to leave. Bembridge is not ungovernable. I'm struggling to find one thing positive for Bembridge that has come out of that group." As previously reported, a non-binding poll of villagers found the majority who responded were against the sale of the council buildings at 5 to 7 High Street.
And with that, we have been told that it's time to finish our reading. So it's goodbye from Mike.
And it's goodbye from Sue.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hello, we're now going to read the second half of the county press.
This is hello from Barry,
And hello from Jan.
and I'll set the ball rolling with a letter from Stuart Blackmore of Ventnor. I cannot be the only one staggered to learn the Isle of Wight Council Chief Executive John Metcalfe and Council Leader Councillor Dave Stewart have decided J. Sandara be brought back to put right the highways PFI. What a monumental slap on the face to the island taxpayers who had to pay his inflated wages. His trousered 180,000 a year for 3 years for cobbling for contract together. Then between January and April this year he pocketed a further near £33,000 to advise his former employers in County Hall what went wrong. Now Messrs Metcalfe and Stewart unashamedly aim to squander another £70,000, maybe as much as £200,000, on Mr Jayasundara's firm Jasmine Consulting UK to sort out this monumental mess of their own making. It's like being caught out by a builder who messes up a roofing job on your house, then calling him back and paying him a second time to say why the roof's leaking, then paying him a third time to put it right. Laughable if the PFI fiasco wasn't such a scandalously profligate waste of island taxpayers' hard-earned cash.
Disgraceful treatment from Mrs. S. Griffiths of Sandown. I am so enraged and saddened at the plight of Dean French in the county press on the 13th of July. I felt impelled to write. A lot of islanders will know Dean from his many years on the reception desk at the Riverside Centre. As Dean points out, his condition has not changed, nor will, so why has his care package? Who deems his time at the Riverside Centre is counted as social activities? Heaven forbid he should want a social life. But social or work, it doesn't alter the fact he still needs helping. I challenge anyone on the panel to put themselves in Dean's shoes and sit in a wheelchair, not being able to put a foot to the ground for a week. I doubt they would last 24 hours. I write with some knowledge, being a mother of a severely disabled daughter, and know how hard it is for them. Although in my 70s, luckily I am fit and able to take her to the cinema or some social event, making sure she is safely home at the end of the evening. But I fear for the future as I get older. The costing she now has to contribute to her care package has risen this year alone 4-fold, but her hours have not. I have no doubt the social workers work hard, but it is a disgrace that a severely disabled person has to lose their freedom and choices to socialise that we take for granted.
And from Brian Greedy in Newport, if ever there was a more heart-rending story that sums up the current Conservative government's attitude to looking after those in need, it was the story in last week's county press of 53-year-old Dean French, who has spent almost all his life in a wheelchair. For 30 years he has worked at the Riverside Centre. He isn't what many used to term years ago a social security scrounger. Suddenly, some manager at County Hall has decided his 70 hours work should be reduced to 21 hours, as he is told those hours are a social activity and not work. This is a council that is presided over by such councillors as Dave Stewart and Stuart Hutchinson, who regularly pontificate about all the good they are doing, meeting their government targets. What they do not tell you is of all the misery they inflict. We are told Dean can appeal by following an internal process, or next take it to the local government ombudsman. And we are assured that all the time Dean is sitting unattended, those at County Hall are undertaking regular reviews of his situation. The stupidity is, if Dean continues to be unable to manage on his new reduced allowance, the council will have to put him in a home, thus removing his independence, and costing them in excess of £1,000 a week. Personally, I think I could make a case for Councillors Stewart and Hutchinson being referred to the Ombudsman because their attendance allowance could be termed earnings that are gained doing a social activity, and not their employment. I feel instead of trying to balance the books with such unfair limits as sent down by Theresa May and her millionaire buddies, the local Tory group should resign en bloc and tell her enough is enough, send her own auditors to do her dirty work. I doubt that it would change much, but it might show the local electorate that they have a bit of backbone. It would be nice to hear how our local MP justifies such a situation.
Keep this school open from a concerned parent. I am writing as the parent of 2 daughters and 1 son. One of my daughters has always been reluctant about school. She could never explain why, just generally disliked it. Now she goes off happily each morning and is now flourishing. Why? Because she goes to the studio school in East Cowes. The school takes all children and treats them all the same. They are all regarded as individuals and known by name by all members of staff. They are taught all the academic subjects by dedicated, excellent teachers, in addition to learning respect for others and their surroundings, courtesy and politeness, how to dress and behave in formal situations, how to present themselves at interviews, etc. They have weekly work experience, so they learn what to expect and what will be expected of them in future employment. Indeed, some have even been offered permanent jobs and or apprenticeships by their work experience placements when they leave school. They all achieve the exam results they need for their futures, and almost all leave with jobs, apprenticeships, or places in further education. This school is excellent at improving the lives and futures of the students that for many reasons do not fit in to the island high school system, and it has several previously homeschooled students enrolled. Where will these students go in the future? Will they drop out of school and employment? Will there have to be thousands of pounds spent on opening a unit for them when there is already one in place? I understand Cowes Enterprise College wants to establish one, but why? Why not use the studio school with its classrooms, fully equipped science laboratories, engineering workshops, and experienced staff? Surely somebody, somewhere, can see the foolishness of this closure and the logic of keeping it open. So yes, its Ofsted report says requires improvement. But it also had many good points, especially the well-being of the students. It would surely be more cost-effective to help this school achieve a good report than set up another system elsewhere, especially as there are already buildings and expertise in place. And there's an editor's footnote to this letter. We do not normally print anonymous letters, but this heartfelt plea from the mum of a pupil at the school raised important points we thought should be heard.
And from R.J. Spate of Newport, today's CP came with a supplement on the annual Isle of Wight Motor Show, mainly populated by articles by Bill Bradshaw, promoting the latest models with gusto. I searched in vain for any promotion of a pure electric vehicle, a small run round of this type being ideal for the island. Promotion of such a vehicle, or indeed of any reference to the environmental well-being, does not seem to fit well with the island motor dealers. I would hope island residents start taking the dealers to task. And the editor's footnote is, the advent of hybrid and all-electric motors is a critical development, especially with the government policy to end all new car sales of petrol and diesel-powered cars by 2040. Drive has featured these developments and cars but the Isle of Wight dealers, who do stock and promote hybrid cars, on this occasion wanted to highlight the debt owed to the pioneers of the show on its 40th anniversary.
When will the Isle of Wight Council admit the recently instituted opening times for the waste site at Limbottom are a complete mess? There are vehicles lined up waiting to use the facility, and staff wanting to conduct a question and answer session at the gate. And there are cars waiting to turn right in the middle of the road. In one move, it has created an absolute nightmare. When you consider these things along with issues such as the chain ferry, isn't it time the officers of the council responsible for these gigantic mess-ups took their leave and resigned? I know it's an old cliché, but they really could not run a P... up in a brewery. We pay vast amounts of hard-earned money for services that, time after time, they fail to deliver. At least, if it were a business, it would surely be liable to court action for misrepresentation. The council is an absolute shower and a disgrace to good management. I wish there were more ways to hold these people to account.
And there's a letter of thanks to the Isle of Wight for making our holidays so great, from Simon and Shirley Tracy of Tamworth. We would like to thank everyone and everything on the Isle of Wight for making our holiday so special last week. Obviously, the great weather helped enormously. Everyone we spoke to made us feel so welcome, and the scenery is so spectacular. It was a real pleasure to not see litter-strewn streets and graffiti everywhere. The island and its beaches were spotless. You, the people of the Isle of Wight, deserve great credit. We cannot wait to return.
And this is a letter from Alan Deeming of East Cowes. No effect on yachting. I write with regard to the article fears proposed MCZ, which is Marine Conservation Zone, will harm Yacht Club. That was in the County Press of the 13th of July. The current data sheet for this proposed Marine Conservation Zone makes no reference to any impact on sailing. I have been involved as a stakeholder in discussions about local MCZs for several years, and the main concern has always been anchoring in our seagrass beds. Despite there being seagrass beds within the area of the Yarmouth to Cowes, it is conspicuous by its absence from the list of features to be protected. The Marine Management Organisation, MMO, is the only body authorised to regulate sailing and boating, other than commercial and recreational fishing. But despite there being over 700 hectares of seagrass beds, and that's the data from the Hants and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust Inventory of Eelgrass 2014, within the Solent area, all of which lie within some sort of designated protected area, the MMO has not yet introduced any management measures for it. Furthermore, the latest Natural England advice package for this proposed MCZ, contained in its publication JP026 Edition 1 Annex 1, makes no reference to management of yachting and associated mooring. From that, it seems unlikely any significant detrimental effect on yachting would ensue from the Yarmouth to Cowes MCZ being designated. It would, however, be reasonable to assume the archaeological site off Boldenor would be subject to some management of anchoring.
And here is a tribute to, it says, the wonderful Rupert Beasley. Steve Parks' cartoon in tribute to the CP's Rupert Beasley, who has finally put down his pencils after 30 years. There's a picture, which is a typical Beasley effort. It reminds one of the members of the Simpson family with protruding eyes. He's holding up a board which says "For sale, drawing board and pens, apply within." I was dismayed to learn that Rupert Beasley has decided to retire as the County Press's regular cartoonist. I met Mr. Beasley a few years ago when I was volunteering at Dimbola Lodge, and he was due to come in to collect some of his works which had been on display. I didn't recognise him. For some reason I expected him to look like one of his cartoons, but asked, "Are you Rupert Beasley himself?" He replied, "Who wants to know?" And I told him I was a big fan, and he owned up. He will be a hard act to follow, though there's no shortage of talent on the island, of course. Allow me to submit a modest offer of my own. I'm not volunteering, though.
And this is from Julia Baldry of Ventnor. Shanklin residents will be pleased to hear they have good Samaritans in their town. Well, of course, they know this already. Last Sunday afternoon, we suffered a front wheel puncture just off the traffic lights at the beginning of Queen's Road. A very kind young man named Anthony went out of his way to find us a Sunday breakdown service. Also, 2 more young men, Rhys and Dan, stopped to see if they could help. What stars?
And now we have, looking back, 100 years ago, July the 20th, 1918, a distinguished islander, Sir Frederick W. Black, who had been in America attached to the British War Mission, reported back to the county press. He had been delivering addresses and speeches to emphasise the part of the Allied navies played in the war. Sir Frederick became famous for his public speaking and was described as a blossoming war correspondent. Their island soldiers stationed in Germany were captured as prisoners of war. Sergeant Alfred Westhorpe of Newport, Private Parsons of Lake, and Lieutenant Corporal Bell of Cowes were reported missing 14 weeks before the CP received a note. The men sent letters stating they were in livable conditions and in high spirits.
75 years ago, 8 occupants of a taxi had a miraculous escape after the vehicle mounted a bank and did a double somersault. The incident occurred near the entrance to Osborne House when the steering locked. Although the car was badly damaged, all passengers escaped with minor injuries. Also 75 years ago, Queen Elizabeth accepted as a homage a poem written by island resident Miss M. Swan of Ryde. Miss Swan, a member of the WVS and Assistant District Commissioner for Cubs, dedicated the poem to Her Majesty. It started, "Leader of our nation's women, one whose duties never cease."
And 50 years ago, July the 13th, 1968, a thunderstorm of tropical intensity led to flooding and damage of many towns and villages. The heaviest rain fell in the West Wight, where Captain F. Barnett of Totland Bay reported 2.27 inches during the night. The main road between Yarmouth and Newport was unusable. Negotiations were completed for the purchase of Bembridge Harbour from British Rail. The Bembridge Harbour Improvement Company Limited had been negotiating for 10 years. A spokesman from the company said it aimed to develop and improve the harbour for both yachting and commercial purposes.
And 25 years ago, a massive £25 million scheme to transform Newport Harbour into a major tourist and leisure attraction by extensively redeveloping the eastern bank and building a water-retaining lock was unveiled. The ambitious scheme was put to Medina councillors by Ashmead Management Limited. It planned a large business-class hotel, a maritime museum, restaurants and bars, sports facilities and pedestrian walkways. Also, 25 years ago, a major operation to crack down on crime resulted in 16 arrests and the recovery of stolen property. Named Operation SCART, the officers swooped simultaneously on selected targets, aided by 40 CID reinforcements from the mainland. The crackdown came after it was revealed crime had doubled on the island in the previous decade.
And 10 years ago, July the 18th, 2008, the predicted £50 million drop in tourism looked set to become a reality, as a poor Easter had been followed by a dire early season. The county press reported there had been a fall in ferry traffic, and businesses were hoping for a late heat wave to help out. Chairman of the tourism sector of the Isle of Wight Chamber of Commerce said an 8% reduction in tourists was to be expected. And an animal lover branded the use of snare traps evil after her pet cat was trapped in one for almost a week. The 12-year-old Ginger Tom had to have his leg amputated after crawling home. Owner Hilda Hancock said, "It's just evil to endanger animals in such a cruel way."
And moving on now to Wight Memories. An enterprising bid for freedom. James Wolven, on an escapee from a young offenders institution who stole a plane from Bembridge Airfield. The daring escapades of a young man who stole an aeroplane from Bembridge Airfield while on the run in 1949 made headlines around the world. On May the 30th that year, the 18-year-old escapee of a youth detention centre, Brynley Fussell, broke into a hangar at Bembridge under cover of night. He had never flown before, but that didn't stop him. Mr. Fussell had spent years in young offender institutions across the country. At the time, the youth custody system was a haven of bullies and psychopaths, and he was beaten and abused by staff and older boys, one time even being hanged by the neck, only surviving because the hook he was strung up from broke. He was originally put in the system as a young boy, not even in his teens, when he accidentally set fire to a haystack during an early experiment with smoking. He was charged with arson. Mr. Fussell said, "Being in a situation where I was being abused, I decided there was nothing for it but to run away. Where to, I don't know, but anywhere was better than this. So in the middle of the night, I squeezed out of the dormitory window, which was 3 stories up, and climbed over to a drain pipe. Thus began a string of escapes, each time spending a short time on the run before being caught again and returned to a youth detention centre."
He ended up in an institution on the island, and after his 3rd escape was arrested after rowing across the Solent and was sent to Rochester Borstal in Kent. Mr. Fussell said, "I started to think about my efforts to get out of the country somehow, but I seemed to be thwarted on every attempt I made. So I started to think along unconventional lines, and the thought of flying came to my mind. On his first escape from Rochester, he came back to the Isle of Wight, the rationale being the island was the last place authorities would look for him. Back on the island, he managed to get a trial flight in a de Havilland Tiger Moth at Bembridge Airfield. Flying had become an obsession for Mr. Fussell. To him, aircraft represented freedom and the possibility to escape to distant lands. During his time in institutions, Mr. Fussell absorbed all the knowledge he could about aviation from aviation magazines and newspaper articles. While out on his passion of flight, he quizzed the pilot about the instruments in the aircraft and how everything worked. Mr. Fussell said, "I found it was not as difficult to fly as I thought, and I was able to follow him through the controls." He hung around until nightfall and broke into the hangar and moved 2 other aircraft and a crash tender out of the way before pushing the plane he wanted out into the airfield. He started the engine, carried out the pre-flight checks he had read about in the magazines, and roared off into the dawn light. His plan was to fly to Ireland and make a new life for himself there. Mr. Fussell said, "I had a rather shaky take-off, but I soon got the hang of it and headed west over the Solent and across the countryside and crossed over the Severn estuary. Unfortunately, the flight lasted only an hour. When running low on fuel, he was forced to land. I could see Newport, Wales in the distance, but the fuel situation was not good, so I had to make a landing as soon as possible before the fuel ran out. I spotted a field that seemed to be okay to land in. I put the flaps down and throttled back the engine. I just got over the hedge and flared out and made a soft landing. I managed to miss the cows in the field, and no damage was done to the aeroplane. Going on the run, the young Mr. Fuzzle was caught shortly afterwards, and with 3 more years added to his sentence, was returned to Rochester. After a year of more escapes and more extensions to his sentence, he was in the air again, this time making it all the way to France. In November 1950, he was on the run in Northamptonshire and found his way into a hangar at Sewell Aerodrome, where he found an austere J1. He wheeled it out, broke the lock on a fuel pump and filled it up, hid from a night watchman, primed the engine, swung the prop, strapped himself in and taxied off into the dark. There were no lights to see the instruments. By then gingerly opening the throttle, the plane began to move. He landed twice before crossing the channel and flew low over the sea. Once in France, he landed in a field and asked some farm workers for directions, but they spoke no English. He kept going until he ran out of fuel. He got a lift from a van to Orleans, but the driver must have heard the news on the radio, because he put Mr. Fussell up for the night, and in the morning the police were there and he was arrested. Mr. Fussell's name was on everyone's lips at the time. He was even discussed in Parliament, when MP Sir Ian Fraser suggested in the House of Commons that, instead of imprisoning Mr. Fussell, his talents should be channelled into the Royal Air Force. Mr. Fussell received hundreds of letters from all over the world, and one particular letter changed his life. Aviation writer Geoffrey Dorman sent him a copy of his book British Test Pilots and said if Mr. Fussell learnt to live an honest life, he could be like the men in this book. This was the first time I had been offered help of any kind, and was a major turning point in my life, Mr. Fussell said. Back in Britain he was sentenced to further 21 months, but was let out after 14 for good behaviour, and Mr. Dorman took him to meet the legendary engineer Sir Stanley Hooker at the Bristol Aeroplane Company, who gave him a job in the engine tests department. With many other engineering jobs following that, Mr. Fussell settled down to a productive, crime-free life and went on to become a renowned micro-light aviation expert, gaining his full pilot's licence in 1988, some 40 years after that first maiden flight out of Bembridge. He now lives with his family in South Wales.
And moving on now to My View by Rebecca Concorini. Using the NHS as a political football is the title. There is something distasteful about politicians jockeying for positions on the latest bandwagon to promote themselves or their political parties over and above the cause they claim to be so passionate about. The NHS has celebrated its 70th birthday amid growing concerns the very core of the service is being slowly eroded by successive governments. They force costly reorganisations. After those incredibly democratic consultations with the public, who I suspect wish they would just leave it well alone, force it into a corporate model, which is ridiculous, and dangle threats to it to the electorate. One side always claims the other will murder the NHS if they get into power. Quite charming how they frighten the sick, the elderly, and their families to gain political hold, don't you think? At a local level, there has been petty squabbling and point scoring on social media between politicians in the Isle of Wight Save Our NHS group. And so the bickering goes on, without any of them seeing the irony of how party politics has inflicted the gravest damage to our NHS. Local party leaders are petulantly inflicting a pointless power struggle onto a group of volunteers, trying to protest about cuts to the NHS as a grassroots movement, in a non-partisan manner for the good of everyone. It's time our public services stopped being mucked about and used as a political football by political parties desperate to cling onto or gain power.
The NHS, fire service, police, welfare and social services are all there to service a public need. As our population grows, one would think it was sensible to allow the public services to grow too. If the electorate were to be asked what their priorities were, I'd hazard a guess these services would be top of the list. Political parties have lost their way. They seem to believe, like some cult, their party is the most important item on the agenda. It is not. The people are the most important item. The same people who elected these feckless twits walking the grand halls of Westminster or their local council chambers, puffed up with self-importance, believing they are the new messiahs, entitled to ride roughshod over what the people elected them to do. It's a weighted system, and it's weighted against the very people politicians are elected to serve. Politics has become the disease which is destroying our services. If we want to highlight how strongly we feel about public service, then it's us, the electorate, who need to take charge of the lobbying and protesting. I'm asking our current and potential political leaders to leave their political rosettes and egos at the door, listen to the people and support them above petty political differences. Stand by society and its vulnerable and stand up to your political masters who insist political mileage and photo opportunities are more important than doing the right, essential thing. Show true, ethical and inspiring leadership at this difficult time, and show those at grassroots level that you are there for them, not your party. It could be life or death for some.
And this is from Malcolm Mime, far from the madding crowds. Welcome to Weekender, the #1 guide to events going on across the island this weekend. What a weekend it is set to be, the main events being the Pride Parade on Saturday and Ride Slide on Sunday. Both Pride and Slide will attract very large crowds. Large crowds aren't, of course, for everyone, and some of you may be scanning the pages of your Weekender looking for something a little quieter to do. Well, scan no further. I am now going to point you in the direction of a number of events which aren't mentioned anywhere else within these pages, which will not only take you far from the madding crowd and will not only take you to some of the most beautiful parts of the island, but are also the most quintessentially English summer events you could possibly wish to attend. Have I got you interested? So then, where, when, and what are these events of which I write? Well, you have a choice, and it will depend on what you are after. Although there is a common theme, all involve bats, balls, sandwiches, and cups of tea. If you haven't guessed by now, I am of course referring to the greatest sport known to man or woman, cricket.
On Saturday afternoon there are matches taking place at a number of beautiful island cricket grounds, including Ventnor, Shanklin, Ryde and Porchfield. If you go to Steep Hill in Ventnor, you'll see the island's premier side in action against Salisbury in Division 1 of the Southern Premier League. Ventnor's ground is very unusual bowl shape, and if you choose to watch on the top of the bowl nearest the road, then you can even see the sea, as long as the infamous Ventnor mist hasn't rolled in. The pavilion is open to all, with a well-stocked bar. Possibly the most picturesque ground on the island can be found at West Hill in Shanklin, and on Saturday a Shanklin side will be hosting cows in a local cup match. The quality of the cricket may not be as high as at Ventnor, but if it's the sound of leather on willow, in an aesthetically pleasing environment that you're interested in, this really is a place to be. Ryde's ground is located on the outskirts of the town in Harding Shoot, and has a reputation for being one of the best in terms of standard on the island. On Saturday, a Ryde team will be taking on a team from Southampton in Hampshire, in a Hampshire League match. If it gets too hot outside, you can always watch from the comfort of the pavilion, which again has a well-stocked bar. Many touring cricket teams visit the Isle of Wight, and on Saturday a side from Lenham in Kent will be playing at the beautiful Porchfield Cricket Club. Porchfield is one of the last truly rural island cricket grounds and even has horses in the adjoining fields. For many people, Porchfield is a true representation of what cricket is all about. So if you fancy sitting back in a deck chair with either a cup of tea or beer from the recently refurbished bar, enjoying cricket played in the spirit that it should be played, then head over to Coleman's Lane. There are also games on Saturday at Smallbrook in Ryde, at Newport, Victoria Recreation Ground, at Northwood, and also Freshwater. Who needs crowds?
And this is an item headed, "Which Isle of Wight do tourists come for?" Behind the news by David Newble. As Britain basks in the longest and hottest summer since 1976, the island has come to resemble a Mediterranean idyll. These blisteringly hot days, with temperatures regularly nudging 30 degrees centigrade, have been a massive boon to the tourist industry on the Isle of Wight, and have been a bonus for the man charged with bringing more visitors to the island. Visit Isle of Wight's new boss, Will Miles, is a man on a mission to boost the number of visitors to the Isle of Wight. But despite the undoubted benefits of the summer sunshine, Will, 54, is acutely aware long hot summers such as this are a rarity. So he is determined to increase visitor numbers in those what are called in the trade shoulder months, in other words, outside the traditional season. It helps that Will is an island enthusiast. He lives here with his wife and children and seems genuinely enamoured by the place. I mention my favourite views of the island: Totland Bay, incredible sunsets over the Solent at Gurnard, and he nods enthusiastically, confessing a passion for paddleboarding at age 54. Before landing the Visit Isle of Wight job, Will was head of sales and marketing at Cowes-based UXA. Before that, he had a travel and tourism background, beginning at a stately home in Ripley, Yorkshire, and later for P&O Ferries, leaving in 2011.
The contacts he gained while working for P&O certainly helped him in his current role, he said. With a £450,000 budget for next year, paid for by tourism-related businesses, Will is drawing up a comprehensive plan for boosting visitor numbers to the island in 2019. However, he is keeping tight-lipped about the exact plan, although this year Visit Isle of Wight has already, he says, generated £3.5 million worth of positive coverage for the island. He said, "We work very hard at that with our press and PR team. We have also linked up with Visit Britain and Visit England. What he can say is that an overarching narrative for why tourists should come to the island is on the agenda. Will is at pains to emphasise people visit for many reasons, including the island's food, its vibrant arts and music scene, its wonderful scenery, walks and cycle routes, its Victorian heritage, as well as the traditional bucket and spade holiday." He said, "We have all these elements in this small but big-hearted island. we are looking at developing an overarching theme. Everyone's Isle of Wight is different. I want businesses on the island to buy into this approach. Will is creating a competition for people to win a romantic weekend on the island, which is linked to the Pride event. A major part of what Will and his team does is trying to get opinion-forming journalists to visit the island and see what it has to offer. He is also using social media, including Instagram and bloggers, as well as Visit Isle of Wight's successful website, which in 2017 had nearly 1.5 million unique visitors. So far, the number of unique visitors to the site has already reached 1.2 million this year already. Will believes the island already punches above its weight, considering the budget Visit Isle of Wight has, and he hopes islanders will work with the organisation to help boost the number of visitors coming here. He said, "We don't live in an ivory tower. We are here to work with our strategic partners. It is about engaging with people." He added, "The island is my home and my family's home. It is where we want to be. It is an amazing place to live. My task is to increase visitor numbers here."
Well, that is all we have time for today, so it's goodbye from Jan.
And it's goodbye from Barry. I hope we have a very nice weekend and continue to enjoy this glorious weather. Thank you.
This is the BBC.
This is In Touch, the magazine programme for people like me who are blind or partially sighted. I'm Peter Wight. Thanks for downloading this week's edition. Good evening. Tonight, the airports that are still failing to offer a good service to visually impaired passengers. And can you have too much vision?
The best way I've come up with of describing it is if you take a ruler and you look through the edge, everything is shunted a little bit extra, 4 times to the left and 4 times up.
Why, multiple vision can pose a whole host of problems of its own. But first, some UK airports are still not providing a good enough service to disabled passengers, so says the Civil Aviation Authority, whose report says that although most UK airports have improved over the past year, 3, Gatwick, Stansted and Birmingham, still need to do better, and 1, Manchester, continues to be rated as poor. In particular, the report draws attention to passengers having sometimes to wait for an hour or more for someone to escort them from an arriving plane. Quite a lot of the recent publicity on this has concentrated, for good reasons, on wheelchair users. But for visually impaired passengers, the problems can be rather different. Back in 2015, partially sighted Diane Roebuck told In Touch what happened to her when she arrived back in Manchester from a boating holiday.
The air stewardess asked me what sort of assistance I would like during the flight, and I said I just really did need somebody to walk alongside me so that I could get to the luggage reclamation and then on to the arrivals lounge. But when it came to actually getting off the plane, she said, "I'm really sorry, but the only thing we can get you is wheelchair assistance." And I said, "Oh, I don't need wheelchair assistance." She said, "No, but that's the only way we can get you assistance from the aircraft is by booking a wheelchair."
Which must have come as a surprise to you, because presumably you had booked this on the understanding that you could just have somebody's arm.
Absolutely. It's meet and greet, or meet and assist rather, I think is what they call it. So when the gentleman came to meet me with the wheelchair, it was perfectly obvious that I was walking from the aircraft to the wheelchair, and I had my long cane out, but I still had to get in the wheelchair. He was saying, "Now, what does your suitcase look like?" So I described it to him, and he saw one coming around, and he says, "Is that it?" So I'm this visually impaired person who can't see enough to walk, but I can see enough to identify my suitcase when it's coming around the trolley.
Right. So were you offered the option to walk if you wanted to when you got onto the ground?
No, I wasn't. And that was very disappointing. And I did say, when we got my suitcase, I'm perfectly capable of walking. I'm quite happy to do that. And the gentleman pushing the wheelchair said, "No, please just stay in the wheelchair and I'll take you to the airport arrivals where my son was waiting to collect me."
I'd like to ask you one thing, because this does crop up a lot. I've had this experience. And I guess the point is, why does it matter so much? I do know some blind people who say, "Oh, why make such a fuss about it? You can sit in the wheelchair, you can get whisked through, you can dodge the queues. Why do we make such a fuss about it?"
Well, I found it very embarrassing, to be honest. I'm perfectly capable of walking. I'd just been on a 3-week sailing holiday and had no mishaps, and yet I had to sit in a wheelchair and be pushed. And I found it hugely embarrassing, quite demeaning. And I was also worried about the impression it would have on my son when he saw me coming into the arrivals lounge in a wheelchair. I thought he's going to think I've broken my leg or had an accident or something. I am very capable of getting myself from A to B. But if it's in an area that I'm not familiar with, I just need to be able to walk by the side of somebody to make sure that I get where I'm going.
Well, that was Diane Roebuck. Well, the company that were providing assistance at Manchester Airport, OCS, said the people on the ground were trained and should have been able to provide assistance by simply walking alongside her. They said it was an individual mistake. Well, Paul Smith is the Civil Aviation Authority's Consumers and Markets Director and has been looking at this report. Paul, this is what we often hear when something goes wrong, that it's an individual, that it isn't the system. What's your reaction to what you've just heard?
Well, obviously Diane's experience is, a very disappointing experience, and it does illustrate one of the important things that I think airports that do deliver a really good service to people needing extra assistance do, which is really understand the individual needs of the passenger, talk to the passenger, make sure that what they're providing to them is what that passenger needs. In that particular case, that doesn't seem to have happened, and the type of service that Diane needed wasn't provided. I think the report that we've published today does illustrate really good progress in general. We've got 16 airports ranked as very good. That's up from 6 the previous year. But there are, and Manchester is one of them, airports that need to improve. Manchester we've rated as poor. That's principally because its waiting times for assisting passengers have been too long, sometimes up to an hour or more. So this is a report really to highlight good practice and things that are going well, but also recognise that there is significant room for improvement in a number of cases.
And I think it's reasonable, just to stay on the issue of wheelchairs for a moment, it's reasonable to suggest that the system is based around them, so that if, for example, you get to an airport, you are tended to treat all as a homogenous group. So I've been told, oh, well, you know, we've got 3 wheelchairs here and you've got to come with them. They may want to go to baggage claim. I don't necessarily want to baggage claim. And again, I've found this assumption that you will get in a wheelchair. So it is an issue of choice, isn't it?
It should be, absolutely, and I think it can start. It sounds like Diane would have done this, providing, information to the airline at the time of booking about your needs. It should be about understanding the personal needs of people, and this is getting even more important. I think we put out a report quite recently about hidden disabilities as well, and that really is about asking people what their particular needs are and responding to those needs rather than making assumptions that a particular form of assistance will always be the right thing for everybody.
Amongst the other things that you found in your report is this issue of unacceptably long waits for passengers needing assistance. Manchester gets a particularly bad press as far as this is concerned. Why is this the case? Because again, it often seems that it has to do with them having to collect everybody all at once and perhaps not having enough staff to do it.
Yeah, so you're right. One of the 3 things that we take into account in ranking the airports is how quickly they assist passengers to get off the aeroplane, and we set a target time of no more than 20 minutes. Manchester wasn't able to meet that in too many cases and had some very, very long waits. There can be a range of reasons why that happens. Sometimes it may be resources, sometimes training, planning. Sometimes things do go wrong. Flights are late, etc., that make it more challenging. But lots of other airports have been able to deliver a really good service in terms of speed of helping passengers. Heathrow is a good example that was ranked poor last year and has improved through to good this year, with a real focus on making sure that the staff have the right training and support, making sure that there is enough resources to provide the right types of service, and the leadership at the airport taking responsibility. I think the good thing with Manchester is they are responding. We've got a performance improvement plan that they're required to follow through, and I think we're seeing a real sense that Manchester wants to improve and wants to provide a better service to disabled passengers.
Your report says you'll hold airports which underperform in the way that Manchester has to account. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so we've got a formal commitment from Manchester to improve, a performance improvement plan which is on their website, which they're working to deliver. And we have enforcement powers which can go all the way through to taking an airport to court and the court having the ability to impose a fine on them. So we're really serious about making sure that improvements happen. I think what we've seen, these reports in the last 2 years, have been a real catalyst for airports to improve. They do not want to get poor ratings in this report. Heathrow, as I said earlier, has improved significantly over the last year. Edinburgh has gone from being poor 2 years ago all the way through to being very good this year. So I think the report, together with us being really clear that we will take action if there is not improvement, provides a really strong basis for airports to improve.
That was Paul Smith from the Civil Aviation Authority. Well, we were of course keen to talk to someone from Manchester Airport, but despite offering them options when they could be interviewed, we were told no one was available. So pretty much what disabled people waiting on their planes are told. In a statement, Manchester said they did acknowledge the findings and were committed to improve. They said the report highlighted positive changes they'd made and that a £1 billion transformation project would soon improve customers' experiences. Now, we also had lots of responses to our interview with the BBC's Head of Current Affairs, Joanna Carr, about subtitles on foreign news stories. Now, when there's no spoken translation in English, we're left listening to huge chunks of a foreign language and missing big sections of the story. Alex Scott was not impressed. He said,
I was so annoyed and irritated to hear those contributors whinging and moaning about foreign language segments. What about all of us who have struggled over the years to learn those languages and really look forward to being able to get the full nuances of what somebody is saying, rather than the meaning being distorted by the translator's views and opinions?
Jerome Verand agreed.
Broadcasting the original sound allows bilingual people, including some blind ones, to listen to the original meaning of the person speaking. Adding an English dub on top of that would prevent these bilingual individuals from getting the original meaning of the conversations.
Both Alex and Jerome did agree there should be widespread audio description. Meanwhile, Alison McIntosh was disappointed with our guest's response.
The real shock was that neither the head of news and current affairs nor the person talking about accessibility appeared to be convinced that it mattered. The arguments raised were ridiculous. Of course reporters want to be there first. As a journalist, I understand this. But the text already exists in subtitle form. So can't someone just read it?
And Sean McGarry made this request to those BBC bosses.
Under the Equality Act 2010, information must be available in alternative formats to cater for the different audiences. There's no excuse nowadays with technology for not catering for all types of audiences. I hope the BBC can see where their responsibility lies and just get on with it.
Well, we're always trying to get on with it here at In Touch, so do keep your emails coming. That's intouch@bbc.co.uk. More ways to get in touch with us at the end of the programme. Now, it's reasonable to expect that most In Touch items are going to focus on people with poor sight or none. But we've recently heard from Cressida Ryan, who's struggling with a condition which could be described as too much sight. When she tries to get help from agencies dealing with visual impairment or government departments, they often just don't get it. So what is multiple vision? When she joined us from Oxford, Cressida explained what happened to her.
About 14 years ago, I was a school teacher and a really bad bout of migraine came on. And I gather one symptom of migraine I'd never really tuned into was that you can get double vision. Unfortunately, when the migraine stopped, the double vision didn't, and it carried on and even got worse.
So I think what I need to ask you to do is explain what you see, what it actually looks like.
That's a really tricky one, but the best way I've come up with of describing it is if you take a ruler or a glass and you look through the edge, you get a split. And that's happened to me. So everything is shunted a little bit extra, 4 times to the left and 4 times up. So there's weird fragmentation around the sides.
You can understand why people are puzzled in a way because, for example, just to take an example of things that you do, the DVLA allow you to drive, and yet I understand that you actually find getting around on your own, actually walking in the streets, quite problematic.
Yes, so Because everything is crystal clear and stable, so it's not moving, nothing's ghosted, nothing's shimmering or anything. The DVLA assessed me loads of times. I've had more than one assessment with them, and various consultants wrote and agreed that it was sufficiently weird. I'm matching up every car with every lane, every light with every light, and I know whether I'm safe or not. What's hard when you go out on the street is then you've got crowds. And all of a sudden, you've just got huge amounts of data and loads of people and flashing lights and signs on train displays that are moving too quickly and are badly contrasted. And then all of a sudden, it's just too much and I can't actually register it.
And it's not just people who find this difficult, it's agencies and organisations, I think. So I gather that there's a difference in the way that even parts of the same government department deal with your disability.
I was just about to give up work to start a PhD when it happened. So I was a student and no one really knew quite what to do about it. And then I re-entered work, and access to work have been amazing. They've assessed me, I've had support from individuals, I've had computing support, you name it, they have tried their best. So at work, everyone says, yes, you've got a problem, let's see if we can help. But as soon as you go into normal life, you go for something like PIP, for example, and they say, well, what percentage sight loss have you got?
Just to remind people, just to remind people, PIP is personal independence payments. Yeah.
As soon as you go for something that's outside of work, then the language is that of what percentage sight loss have you got, rather than what impact does this have on your life, because it can't be categorised in those terms, and so no one knows quite what to do with it.
And I mean, how do you try to explain that to people? How do you try to get over that?
So far, with very little luck. It's just been a question of, I know I have a child, for example, and when I was pregnant, the NHS, people I came into contact with, health visitors, etc., they were fantastic at saying, what is particularly difficult about this for you and how can we help? Because your coordination might not be 100% when you're rapidly changing shape. So I was even more likely to walk into things, etc. And they were much better at seeing things at task-based. And I think it's when you find individual people within systems who are used to having to deal with how life changes that you find it much easier. But systems as a whole don't seem to understand so well.
So in a daily life kind of context, as opposed to the work context, what is difficult there, even within your own home?
Trying to read recipes in the kitchen, because that's not something where you're concentrating on what you're reading, for example. You're too busy trying to not burn yourself. What other things? Stairs. Don't like escalators very much, or stairs, because they're too much of the same data.
Even your own stairs?
Even my own stairs. I know how many they are, and therefore I can count them, and that way I don't fall up and down. Or music. I like singing. I sing in a choir in Oxford, and trying to read the music there or even at home on the piano is a little bit confusing. But I've got much better at learning by ear now, so that I can still do some stuff.
And of course, in a work context, you do a very demanding kind of job, given your problem. You're a biblical Greek scholar, which I imagine means a lot of fairly intense study of documents.
I'm the instructor in New Testament Greek at the Faculty of Theology and Religion in the University of Oxford. I'd already been learning Greek for 10 years when the problem started. And I said to the consultants, what are my options? And he said, do you think you can do the PhD? And I thought, well, I hope you're going to tell me I can, not ask me if I can. So we just took it from what we needed to do. And I teach Greek, research Greek, and I'm also learning Hebrew and Sanskrit. So that's 3 separate scripts to deal with, which just made me a better teacher, because all of a sudden I had to reduce the visual load that I was dealing with, which made it easier for my students too. So I've been able to do some work on what Unicode fonts work best for people who can't use their eyes as well. And I discovered those great video readers that I was given a video reader to help read things and put them on a screen. And if you take that with rare books, it shows up the print really well, but it also works really well if you're working with old manuscripts and trying to work out if something is a crease or an actual bit of writing, because they show up in different intensities once you use the video reader on them. It's really helpful. My friends get jealous because I can read manuscripts better than they can.
And I understand you think that the terminology we used doesn't help very much because you don't fit into it.
Yes, I know my particular case is quite odd, and I haven't really come across anyone with the same thing. But I do gather that things like migraine, things like eyes not working together, something like double vision is not an unheard of condition. But that means you are visually impaired and not partially sighted. And so it's not about being politically correct. It's about saying, I have no sight loss. In fact, I have the opposite. but I do consider it has an impact on my life, and therefore I would like a way to be able to communicate with people and express there is a problem that doesn't lead to the question of what percentage sight loss have you got.
Cressida Ryan. And if anyone has tips that might help Cressida, we'd be happy to pass them on. You can call our action line for 24 hours after the programme on 0800 044 044. You can email in touch at bbc.co.uk or click on Contact Us on our website. And you can also download tonight's and other editions of the programme from there. And that's it from me, Peter Wight, producer Kevin Core and the team. Goodbye.